Welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, the show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. If you're looking for a podcast to keep you informed and ahead of the game in business, the GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Paula DuPont, and today we're going to talk about a variety of topics, but it's going to vary from a lot of the stories that we've been doing week to week, the grim stories on the toll that the pandemic is taking on business and the economy. And there are plenty of those that we could talk about, but instead, I want to go a little lighter. Today, we'll talk about some subtle signs the tide might be changing or might be beginning to change. Some signs of hope, or at least how businesses are doing normal business things. We're going to talk about how some businesses are embracing the current situation, the current reality, and adjusting their marketing to it. We're going to talk about Facebook and an acquisition that they just made. We're going to talk about the drug race and how that's heating up, about marketing and some techniques that some companies are taking right now. And we're going to talk about the Army playing Call of Duty for real. So all that in just a minute. So in this first segment, I thought we would talk about advertising. I've seen some interesting ads recently and some news about ads that I thought were worth sharing, just because they're maybe subtle signs of either companies adapting to this new reality and marketing to it, or signs perhaps that, things are restoring or going back to somewhat of the way that they were pre-pandemic. And I guess it's important to note that this past weekend, live sports finally returned to TV. NASCAR had its race, was on Fox, and it was the first time that NASCAR had broadcast a race, I believe, since before the pandemic hit back in March. And the ratings evidently were pretty good. I think they had maybe about 62 million viewers that they had. Fox had said that it was the most watched NASCAR Cup Series since the Daytona 500 and since another similar race back in 2017. So they did pretty well with that. And of course, with that came commercials. And during the commercials, there was a commercial for Coke. And it was the first time that Coke has advertised since, I believe that was like March 30th or something like that. And you don't realize sometimes how much of a standard certain things are. And, when I heard that aired during that time, I'm thinking, oh, that's right. I haven't seen Coke ads in a while. Like, you don't realize that you're not seeing them until they come back on. But evidently, what they show in the commercial is a single Coke, which, kind of saying that you can buy a Coke for yourself and, suggesting around social distancing, or 6 packs of Coke. I guess that would be the right amount for a family. So The idea is that they're not showing like big throngs of people getting together, certainly in a stadium, toasting with their Cokes up in the air. It's something more to a personal level, and what Coke you might have in your own home, which, kind of makes things right in the world, I guess. I'm not a Coke drinker, but a lot of people are. And this is one of those advertisers that we've been talking about that have been silent during this time. And although more people are watching TV and are streaming TV, the advertising has been way down, and the stations are feeling it. But anyway, I digress. Another interesting commercial, which I think is kind of a signal, well, not kind of, it definitely is in response to the times that we're in. Hershey brand that owns many, many different products that we like and know. They make icebreakers, the mints, and they also make gum and obviously chocolate and other candy. They had said that sales for mints and gum were down like 40 to 50% during the month of April. And when one of the people who worked there at Hershey's said that his wife was a nurse, and that she and others were talking about there's definitely such thing as mask breath. And he brought this idea into Hershey, into icebreakers, and said, what do you think about that? That apparently there is a such thing as mask breath, that holding this, cloth or fiber, piece of material up to your face all that time, you're just kind of cultivating these germs and smells. And so they came up with a whole ad series about mint before you mask, or I guess hashtag mint before you mask. And since they had done their own internal survey, they being Hershey, they found that 89% of people were wearing masks at some point or another. And so this is a very real thing, evidently, that if you're wearing masks for any period of time, you can have bad breath. So they made this commercial about it, which I just saw recently, and I thought, oh no, is this a whole thing now? Are they going to come out with a special type of mint or gum just to deal with mask breath? I don't know, but right now you figure it works. I mean, we're going to be wearing them for a while now, and are going forward. So I guess we need to deal with that. And when they go away, then they'll become some other type of breath, or just ordinary breath we need to deal with. So those were a couple interesting ads that I've seen recently. There are others that have popped up that I kind of wonder like where this came from. Like Verizon has a cell phone brand. I don't know if it's almost like a pay-as-you-go kind of thing called Visible. And evidently they've been around for a few years, but the ads are popping up more. There's commercials, there's ads on sites, online. And Visible is something where you pay $40 and that includes everything. That's all your costs, assuming you already have a phone. So if you have to buy a phone, that's different. But they use your existing phone. They give you a SIM chip if you're with another provider. But basically you're switching over. So how that ties into the whole pandemic thing, I'm not really sure. I haven't read about what their strategy is. But I'm thinking it probably has something to do with a good price point for cell phones. And you figure with so many people out of work, it's something that's probably a good opportunity right now. Anyway, just some interesting things to think about. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some other signs that maybe things are starting to improve. So we'll be back in just a moment.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking for a podcast that gives you all of the latest news from the world of finance? Then check out the GSMC Financial News Podcast. We'll delve into the ups and downs of the stock market, changes in the economy, and news from the world of real estate and technology. From breaking news on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or the overseas market, to updates on the bond market, if there's money to be made, we'll cover it on the GSMC Financial News Podcast.
I don't know about you, but for me, it's really hard to get my head around the fact that next weekend is actually Memorial Day weekend. Blows my mind. It's pretty early this year. Memorial Day is March. I keep saying March. May 25th. And, I think for a lot of us, it couldn't come at a better time, really. I mean, even though it's early this year, I think we all hoped that the country would be in a better spot by now, and that, more things would be opened up. But across the country, I think most states have had some level of business or activity that has resumed again. A lot of things that just started today. This is the beginning of the week here of May 18th. And, a lot of positive signs, and I see stories, on TV about Memorial Day weekend coming up and how now beaches on both coasts have been opened or will be opened shortly. Down south in Florida, of course, they have been open as well already. And, you hear about, it's funny, you get this kind of mixed message from newscasters saying, you need to heed all the warnings about social distancing, and you shouldn't go to the beach unless you basically live there. But at the same time, in these beach areas, they are preparing for Memorial Day and for people coming to town. So I think it's going to be tough to get people not to go who are in driving distance of going to the beach or any other resorts in this country that basically begin their seasons with Memorial Day. So that we'll just hope that things go well, and that's a positive sign in itself that at least businesses are starting to open up in time for the holiday weekend. But today I saw something in the Wall Street Journal. It was an analysis of different pieces of data that make some sort of correlation to improving economy, or that things could be getting better. And it's not necessarily all scientifically proven that these are things that are going to show the economy's bouncing back, but they do have some relationship there. And some of the things that the article talks about is that that even though there's been record monthly drops in retail sales and manufacturing production in April, there's trends often appear first in private daily and weekly data, and that's the data that they've looked at. One of the things that they've looked at is that map requests on Apple devices fell 50% throughout the country between mid-January and the week ended April 9th. But they have steadily climbed since that time and are now down just 20%. So what they're saying is that although request for maps suggesting driving doesn't necessarily equate to spending, retail visits show the same trend according to this Unicast, which is a mobility data analytics company. So they make some sort of correlation with that. Another thing that they have indicated is that Redfin, which is a real estate brokerage firm, said that home buyer demand, as measured by customers contacting affiliated agents, after plummeting by a third, is now above pre-pandemic levels. So spring being such a big time of year for people to buy and sell homes, it sounds like, at least for this particular real estate company, it's coming back to where it would be if it weren't for the pandemic. Some other companies that are mentioned that have data that suggests a little positivity. On May 7th, Uber Technologies said rides had risen for 3 straight weeks and were up more than 40% in some of the largest cities in Georgia and Texas. And that's suggesting that businesses are reopening, so people need to get there. So that's kind of an interesting number there. Fast food chain Wendy's reported that same-store sales in the week ending May 3rd were down just 2% from a year earlier. So even though it's down, you'd expect it to be much bigger of a drop when you're talking about from the same period of time as last year. So just the fact that they're down only 2%, and that's talking about same-store sales. So that doesn't mean that that everybody's back in the store either, back in the restaurant. That's probably starting to happen in some states, but overall, it's been a thing where you get the drive-through or curbside to get your food. Another piece of data that was interesting was they cited OpenTable, which is one of those online sites where you can reserve a table at a number of different restaurants. You can do that ahead of time. So OpenTable had seated diners at affiliated restaurants in the U.S. had decreased 100% by April 9th. The drop had improved to 95% by May 14th. So subtle, but considering that it went to 100% because nobody was getting into any restaurant anywhere in the country, and now it's starting to come back. So that's another positive sign. So it's pointed out that there really isn't hard data right now to show that the economy is improving or has improved in May from where it was in April, which we can all agree was pretty bleak. But there are some indications, or at least notions that June should be better, and that it's by that point when we get into June, and of course we wouldn't see June numbers till the end of June and beginning of July, but by that point we will have seen a lot more businesses open up, and a good chance that some things will start to look considerably better. One of the things that the article points out is that if the growth in June is sustained, this economic contraction could go on record as the deepest since the 1930s, yet also the shortest. Post-war recessions have lasted 6 to 18 months. So if we can get out of this, start to come out of this in June, I think we'll be ahead of where we've been in the past, and that's what everyone's been expecting, though probably not as optimistically as we had earlier. So that brings us to another commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the latest in the drug race.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
So we've been talking about signs of hope and pieces of information or commercials or signs out there that things are getting a little bit better. And there's nothing more hopeful right now that we can look to than the progress of the drug companies who have been working on the vaccine. I mean, we have been waiting for any little glimmer of hope that this vaccine might get to us sooner than next year, which is even an aggressive timeline for it, considering what it typically takes to develop a vaccine. But still, of course, we recognize that waiting till next year means there's still a lot of people at risk and who are likely going to succumb to this before that time. Nonetheless, and I did say I was going to try to keep things positive, and when it comes to vaccine development, it is positive. It's a wonderful thing, actually, that there are about 100 different companies working on vaccines right now. And just today, May 18th, there was some very encouraging news that came out from Moderna, which is one of the companies in the race to develop the vaccine. They released some results. They're obviously not final results. They're still in the midst of their trials. But they did release some results from their human study that they've been doing. And apparently the results gave a positive signal about the vaccine's ability to protect people and raising the hopes that a weapon for the pandemic was on the horizon. The company said the vaccine induced immune responses in some of the healthy volunteers who were vaccinated, and the shots were generally safe and well tolerated. The results offered a preliminary but promising sign about one of the most advanced coronavirus vaccines in development and suggested that Moderna was on the track to meet its ambitious timetable for producing it, possibly for emergency use in the fall. So that's according to an article today in the Wall Street Journal. It also talks about how there are about 7 other companies besides Moderna who are, in the lead in this race among the 100 that are more aggressively pursuing the human trials. Among the 7 top leaders in the race for the vaccine are Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and I believe Sanofi are among them. And they are all in the process of doing some of the same testing and are actually manufacturing large amounts of their version of the vaccine so that there would be enough doses. And that's, of course, that's a big key in this as well, is being able to quickly ramp up once you get approval of the vaccine, to then be able to have it available on a large scale, not just for the United States, but for the rest of the world. And that's obviously going to be a major challenge. And in fact, just recently, I believe in France, there was a lot of controversy because Sanofi had said that they had reserved a bulk of, or they do have reserved a bulk of the vaccine that they're developing to deliver to Americans first over French. And naturally, French citizens are upset about that and outraged about that. Sanofi has said that it's because of the fact that it's gotten the money from America to develop it, and so there's some issues there. So I don't know how that's going to end up. I'm not sure that that's still going to stand the way that it was last left. But that is an issue, I think, around the world. And in fact, there are other companies, there's an organization that is financially backing another drug that would be produced in Europe just for that reason, to have it more accessible to Europe and other countries as well. Not that if it's produced in the United States, it would be exclusively for the United States. What, in fact, they're looking at in terms of priorities in distributing the vaccine once it's approved is that it would likely go to frontline healthcare workers, and then first responders, and then people who are essential workers who work at grocery stores and pharmacies, and anyone in food supply and mass transit. So that would be the priority as far as getting the vaccine. And where it goes from there, I'm not really sure, and I'm sure there's still a lot of discussion that's being held about that. But it is thought that Johnson & Johnson, for example, they are looking to have some batches of their vaccine ready by early 2020-21. Moderna is looking to have, as I said, they're already beginning to expand their production capacity, and they're working with a Swiss company, Lonza Limited, to make tens of millions of doses a month by the end of this year, with the anticipation that the vaccine would be approved. Now, they still have a way to go with the vaccine, Moderna, that is, who I started off talking about them specifically just because they had released their results today, some of their preliminary results. But they still, they have a way to go. They just got approval from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to begin the second stage of testing that they would look to do in this summer, by July. And I think at that point they might go into the final phase of testing. So I guess, the news is seen as positive. It certainly helped Moderna's stock. It went up about 20% after making the announcement. But, we're hearing things every day. We just recently learned about remdesivir being used to help decrease the length of the virus. And it already is being used quite successfully. So we'll look forward to more daily developments on that front. But it's at least one of those areas that we know things are happening very quickly and aggressively, and can't get better than that in terms of hope for a recovery of this whole pandemic and its impact on our lives and the economy in general. So we're going to take another commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Army playing Call of Duty.
Hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So by now we know that just about every part of society and business has been affected by the coronavirus in some way, shape, or form. And included in that is the business of the military and their efforts to recruit young possible soldiers into the military. And they've had to get creative, because typically they would try to recruit from high schools and at state fairs, county fairs, and other events like that, where you might find young high school graduates looking to develop their career plan, and would be, looking and open to an opportunity like going into the military. So we're not having high school. We're not having state fairs, at least not right now. So the Army's had to come up with other ways, has had to be creative to try to come up with a way that they could still recruit. And what they did was they looked at some of the skills that they had inherent in some of the soldiers in terms of video games and video game playing. And just like, soldiers who would box or compete in other competitive sports as, representing the Army or representing, their unit, instead they developed these e-teams, esports teams. And these are those who have regular jobs within the Army. They might be infantrymen or mechanics or something like that. But they also have special skills in terms of video games. So I thought it was kind of interesting, especially that they have this goal, I guess, that they try every year to recruit about 70,000 new soldiers into the Army. And they looked at, how they might be able to do that. And so they came up with this esports team that would go out and do these tournaments. And they did one recently that was for Call of Duty, which, if you're familiar, it's a military operation, basically, and you're acting as a soldier, and you're heavily armed, and you're going out for the enemy. And there's probably a shorter way to describe that, but it's a war game, I guess, is the short form of that. And so it's interesting that they did this tournament of it and, raise awareness of it. And through that, they're able to talk to, prospects and give their email or information for them to, for potential recruits to contact them or their offices later. I think it's very interesting that they would do that, and that especially that it's Call of Duty. There probably are other games that they play as well, but given the realism of Call of Duty, including blood being splattered on the screen, when someone gets shot, it can be pretty gory and intense. I thought it struck me that it would be kind of interesting that if these recruiters actually saw these prospects playing, that might be a good way to either pick out or weed out ones that would not be good in the military. Those who get shot immediately once they start playing and continually get shot. Or likewise, maybe if there's some people who are, maybe a little bit too bloodthirsty and, doing well, but maybe a little too well. I don't know. Maybe that's not a detriment, but it would certainly see people and how they're reacting in this kind of virtual reality warfield, and to see how they react. But this effort that they've made to do this and traveling around and doing these tournaments, They actually have generated about 13,000 leads from doing this. They have done this by providing a phone number or email address, and they've actually gotten people interested in it. So I thought that it was pretty interesting, and to see what will happen once high schools are back up and running next year, and state fairs, which it's possible maybe some of them might still happen this summer. But it will be interesting to see if this esports team still continues, and if that's one of the primary ways that they're going to go about recruiting, or if that's just going to be, just one of many different ways that they'll do it. I would suspect it'll probably be one. They're not going to let it go if it's worked out for them. I just find it interesting that these soldiers, including one evidently who's a Green Beret, so these are highly skilled soldiers, and they're playing video games. I can hear their mothers yelling now, like, what's that ever going to get you in life? And they would have a good answer back to that, wouldn't they? Well, anyway, that's enough on that topic. And here we are again at time for another commercial. And when we come back, we're going to talk about something that just sounds like business as usual. It's a Facebook acquisition. More on that in just a moment.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
One of the things that could signal that the economy is starting to return back to what it was before the pandemic is when you have news in the business world that is news that could have happened regardless of the pandemic. It's not affected by it, at least not in any obvious way. And it's not good news, it's not bad news, it's just neutral business news. And what I'm talking about are some of the things that we're hearing recently, some mergers and acquisitions, Uber wanting to buy Grubhub and merge with them. And then you have what was announced just recently, maybe it was last week, was that Facebook was acquiring Giphy. And Giphy is the company that has the whole library of shareable images, or GIFs, as you'd call them. And this is something that Facebook is looking to pay, I guess, $400 million for to have that. And it's not necessarily going to be integrated into Facebook, but into Instagram, which obviously Facebook owns. And it should be interesting because I think it will change what Facebook looks like. Undoubtedly, instead of a lot of photography and things, now you're going to see these images, which, I mean, they have a time and place, I guess, for, and which, again, I think changes the nature of Instagram a little bit, but we'll see how that plays out. It's going to be something that will probably be scrutinized because you do have some issues that Facebook has handled before with their acquisitions, antitrust issues, security issues. And one of the things about Giphy is that it's integrated into a lot of other programs, competitors to Facebook, or those that would consider themselves competitors to Facebook. Giphy they claim that they have over 700 million people that see the content every day, that see Giphy contact every day. And many of those views come from some of the apps that I was alluding to before, like Apple's iMessenger or iMessage, TikTok, and Twitter are some of the other big ones that use it. But there are a number of other platforms that have Giphy as part of them as well. MailChimp allows you to insert a GIF when you're creating an email campaign, which is what MailChimp is designed to do. Another one is Signal, which lets you use GIFs to include in messages on iOS and Android. Again, another company that might have an issue with continuing to keep Giphy now that it would be owned by Facebook. Slack, which is one of the workplace communication tools that's being used an awful lot. Slack has access to Giphy. Snapchat, Telegram, TikTok. Oh my God, TikTok. What are people going to do on TikTok if they can't, they still will be able to access it, to access GIFs. But I guess that the issue is whether some of these companies will continue to use it, or whether Facebook may change the rules or change how Giphy works, and whether or not it will still be attractive to these different apps to use. A couple of the other ones that also incorporate Giphy in them is Tinder. I didn't know that, but apparently you can use that as part of the dating site. Trello and Twitter. Now Twitter, that one is interesting, and I think Twitter has already kind of said that they're not too happy about this, and I guess we'll see how this is going to play out. But they also use another GIF company called Tenor, and so they have that, in addition to Giphy, so they may end up just going with that, because there's kind of been a little bit of a feud between Twitter and Facebook. It stemmed from when Facebook acquired Instagram, and some issues that they had between the two services, and they still have drawn a line between each other pretty well, and which you figure in social media is hard to do, where it comes to displaying something that you have on one platform and then you go to display it on the other. And right now there are some walls up on that because of the feud that they have. So it will be interesting to see what happens with them with Twitter being able to use Giphy. So I think it's going to be a matter of how Facebook applies that and integrates it into Instagram, and whether there will be other ways to access it. And incidentally, Facebook, knowing that there has been some criticism and concern raised about security issues and how it will be accessible, they have said that developers will continue to be able to rely on Giphy as they had before the acquisition, and that you would still be able to use Giphy in most apps as you did before. And by the way, when I mentioned before all the different apps, there were a couple others too that use Giphy. There's probably a lot more than I know about or read, but Pinterest and Reddit are another couple ones that are no small sites, but they too also use Giphy. But because of the security concerns, Facebook has said that Giphy has no tracking pixels, cookies, or any other embedded user tracking mechanisms in the GIFs or the stickers. And that's what they told The Verge publication about, addressing some of those issues that people have with security. So that will be something we'll keep track of, and likely Congress and other authorities who will be evaluating this acquisition. So that's the story on that. We are going to take another commercial break, and finally, in our last part of the show, we're going to touch on an interview that Federal Chairman Powell had recently on 60 Minutes, and a couple highlights of that.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
There was a headline 5 days ago in the Washington Post, and it was actually echoed across a lot of different media. But just to give you an example, what was the sentiment 5 days ago, the headline was, U.S. stocks sink with Dow falling more than 500 points after Fed chief signals economic pain ahead. And the article talks about how U.S. Federal Reserve Bank Chairman Jerome Powell had said that the road to recovery would be bumpy. And that was on May 13th. And as I said, there were others who had similar headlines because it appeared that Powell's comments had a big effect on the market. And if you go back and look at other news searches online with his name, you see other headlines like that in the past couple of years. When he says something, it has this huge effect. And perhaps it's deservedly so, considering the position that he holds. Recently, on May 17th, he did a 60 Minutes interview, and he echoed a lot of the same messages that he had said last week that triggered the market to take a fall, which, by the way, it did come back up somewhat on Thursday, the next day. But, from that point on, it's been affected by all different things. And so it's hard to say, if there was any one particular trigger for changes. But we have a pretty good feeling that last week that's what it was. So in any case, in the 60 Minutes interview, he said a lot of the same things. I mean, he didn't try to paint a rosy picture or gloss over it or say that the aid that has been given by the Federal Reserve was going to be enough to get us out of this. What he said was, the economy will recover. It may take a while. It could stretch through the end of next year. We really don't know. The fact that he said he doesn't know, it seems like that's the tag phrase that comes at the end of a lot of what authorities say lately, or even CEOs who are talking about their quarterly results, for how their businesses have been doing in the first part of this year. And everyone expected they wouldn't do well, for March being the first full month of quarantine. Actually, it wasn't a full month, but being the first big month to be impacted by the virus. And then many had forecasted and said that they didn't see where April was going to be much better. And a lot of companies have said things that they expect that the second half of the year they should be coming back in terms of revenue and profit. So, but then they follow it with, we just don't know. And, it's not funny actually, and I don't mean to make light of it, because we don't know. None of us know. And I think when we talk about looking for positive signs that things are changing, things are getting better, it would be nice to hear some things with some sense of assuredness, but perhaps no one can provide that now. I do think that some of the things that Chairman Powell said in the interview last night, I could appreciate. I could appreciate the fact that he also came across not just as a bean counter, mega bean counter and financial expert, but also with someone with compassion. He said, this is a time of great suffering and difficulty, and it's come on so quickly and with such force that you really can't put into words the pain people are feeling and the uncertainty they're realizing. And as I said, I think that's a pretty powerful statement in itself. It doesn't necessarily mean anything in terms of moving forward and signaling positive changes ahead, but it does at least recognize that this pain is more than about the financial crisis. It's about the loss that people have felt and are dealing with, and that someone in his position recognizes that. And although he's got a huge job on his shoulders to try to help bring, the economy back or provide some kind of assurances for that, he's not losing sight of the bigger picture of what's really important in human life. And of course, that leads into the whole idea that we need the vaccine. And I believe he said something to the effect that, we may not have a vaccine anytime soon, but we're going to have to, try to recover anyway, obviously. But he said in this interview, he had said also that the public needs to stay vigilant to avoid the second wave or a second wave of the virus. It would be quite damaging to the economy and to the public confidence. That's the risk that we really want to avoid. So he has said, and was pointed out in the interview, all the different things that the Fed has done to help bolster the economy. They've, from the stimulus grants to the trillions that the Fed has injected into purchasing government securities, providing corporate and small business loans, purchasing high-yield junk bonds, ETFs, that it has done. So he has, been steadfast in trying to address the issue and providing support. And when some of these things were pointed out, Scott Pelley said, well, it sounds like, you've done everything that you could do. And he has said, and Powell responded, he says that there still is a lot more that they can do, and that the Federal Reserve is not out of ammunition by a long shot. and that there's really no limit to what we can do with these lending programs that we have. And I thought that was very encouraging, that there is more that the federal government can do and can offer. And it's not just about throwing out a lot of money and trying to plug these holes that keep coming up. But in talking about the loan program and how that can be better used to really get the economy back on track. So overall, I think it was an encouraging message. He still, maintains the same position that he did in other announcements that where he talked about the economy. And it's direct, and it's, not necessarily a rosy picture, but having that acknowledged and knowing that there is more that's still possible for us to draw on if we need it, I think gives us some hope. So I hope that you find that message hopeful, and perhaps some of the other messages today about us getting closer to getting a vaccine, to businesses returning to normal business practices, to people innovating to incorporate what's happening with the pandemic into their marketing and the way that they're going about selling their product. So I think these are all good signs. I hope you do too. And we're going to continue looking for more positive stories like these, or at least neutral ones. And eventually we'll get back to just regular business news. And that's what this is about, because this is the GSMC Business News Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. And I want to thank you for joining me today. And please make sure to go to wherever it is that you subscribe to podcasts and subscribe to this one. And also, if you wouldn't mind checking out our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram pages and leaving some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Take care and have a great evening.
You've been listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.